All right, this video is looking at starting with the twin studies. In class, I had you partner up with one other person in class and look at the similarities and differences between you and this other random person. Well, the reason that we did that is because I wanted you to be able to see that you have a lot of things in common that you may not even have realized, and that's even with a random person. Some people go to the extreme and say, well, can you imagine if you actually had a twin and all the things that you would have in common with a twin? Well, that actually may or may not actually be true. So I wanted to talk about why do we study twins? Okay, so why do we study twins in the first place? I threw this question out to some of my students, and somebody said, just because they're interesting. Well, what you may think is interesting, they might find annoying. But why we study twins? And if you think about it, this whole chapter is about nature versus nurture. And so the reason that we study twins is because we are looking at that whole idea of nature, which is our genes and our biology, versus nurture, which is our environment. And if you think about it, twins are an excellent way to study that because if you're talking about identical twins, they are genetically the same person, and they had two babies that were created out of one egg and one sperm. Now, obviously, fraternal twins are slightly different because we actually have genetically, there are two separate people. They just happen to be born, share the same uterus in prenatal development, and they were born on the same day. Okay, but there are still things that we can look at and investigate with even fraternal twins and their similarities and differences. Okay, so again, we're studying twins from the standpoint of looking at that idea of nature versus nurture. So the value of separated twin studies. Now, separated twin studies are the best way to really study nature versus nurture because you have that nature component that stays the same. It's biologically genetically the same people. However, if you have separated twins, they are obviously experiencing a different environment. Now, these are not cases where psychologists actually took twins and literally separated them. These are unfortunate cases where the children were given up for adoption, and for whatever reason, they each went to a separate home. Okay, so that's the idea of a separated twin studies. So the value of this is that you can actually take a look at the significance of nature and the significance of nurture and how those things are different. Now, there's actually a very famous Minnesota twin study done. By the way, yes, I do find it ironic that it was done in Minnesota because if you know anything about sports, there's the baseball team, the Minnesota Twins, as well as geographically speaking, Minneapolis, St. Paul, the largest cities in Minnesota are called the Twin Cities. Kind of funny. But the largest twin study, one of the largest twin studies that was done, it was directed by a guy by the name of Thomas J. Bouchard, and it began in 1979, and it was this week-long medical and psychological assessment of both identical and fraternal twins that were separated early in their life and reared apart. So they were, raised apart from each other. Oftentimes, they did not know of the other one's existence, even as they grew up. They had instances where somehow they were brought together, and then that's how they found out that they actually had a twin. Now, your book actually talks about a specific instance in two men that ended up being reared apart, but they had the same name. They were married women that were very similar and had the same name, and they had sons, and both their sons had the same name. They even had dogs that were the same. But that was one example from your book. I wanted to tell you about another example that was also in a companion piece to your textbook. And so it talks about these separated as infants, these twins, Jerry Levy and Mark Newman. Grew up to share characteristics ranging from their firefighting avocation to taste in beer. So neither one of these knew of the other's existence until a shared acquaintance actually brought them together. Upon meeting for the first time, they each saw their own reflection. They had grown the same mustache and sideburns. They each wore the same glasses. As these brothers talked, they discovered they had more than looks in common. Levy went to college and graduated with a degree in forestry. Newman planned to go to college to study the same subject, but opted to work for the city trimming trees. Both worked for a time in supermarkets. Levy had a job installing sprinkler systems, and until relatively recently, Newman had a job installing fire alarms. Both men were bachelors at the time, but they were attracted to similar women, tall, slender, long hair. In addition to being volunteer firefighters, they both share a favorite pastimes of hunting, fishing, and going to the beach, watching old John Wayne movies and pro wrestling, and eating Chinese food in the wee hours after a night on the town. Both were raised in the Jewish faith, but neither were particularly religious at the time of the study. Both men drink only Budweiser beer, holding the can with one pinky curled underneath and crushing the can when it's empty. In becoming acquainted, the observed Jerry, we kept making the same remarks at the same time and using the same gestures. It was spooky. He is he, and I am I, and we are one. So that was just one example of a set of twins that they found. Now, Bouchard did find that heredity accounted for 64 to 74% of differences seen in IQs between the identical twins. Previous studies had found that heredity explained 47 to 58% of the variance. So this showed a lot higher heredity than previous studies had. So this was a very valuable look at twins, and it was very interesting when it came out. There's been many other twin studies done since then, but this was a really big one that was groundbreaking at the time. Now, the problem is there are some questions about reliability about this. So the issue is that first of all, there is some shared prenatal environment. So even though they may have been raised separately, there have been studies that show that those things that happen in the womb affect you for a very long term. And so if you have twins that actually share the same uterus and they share the same prenatal environment, how much does that impact them long term? Okay, so that's one thing. The other question about reliability is that the separated identical twins were rarely separated at the actual moment of birth. The twins in the Minnesota study had on average 5 months together before they were actually separated. So if that first 6 months are very indeed crucial and important to development lifelong, which many psychologists argue, environment could still be contributed to their similar personality if they were together for a period of time before they were separated, even if it was when they were infants. Okay. The other part about this study is that the study itself did not look for twins, so they did not specifically go out and look for twins that were separated and bring them together and say, hey, did you know you had a sister? Did you know you had a brother that is your twin? They didn't specifically look for those individuals. They actually asked for people to kind of come forward and volunteer, saying that, hey, do you have a twin that you didn't know about until recently and you grew apart? So they were relying on self-reporting. Well, the problem with that is that obviously there are a number of people out there that may have had that scenario and they weren't even aware, whereas the people that actually came forward are more likely to have those similarities, as well as that they've been together now for how long, since they got reacquainted before they joined the study. So there are some questions about reliability of twin studies, but overall, remember that the point of the twin studies, even looking at identical versus fraternal twins, is to study that idea of nature versus nurture.